Hey everyone, I'm really excited to be here and thanks for Dave for kicking this off. I mean, this is what the industry needs right now to bring more clarity around AI and inevitably the implications. So Dave's tasked me with a big task here to spend the next 30 minutes kind of walking you through AI's implications for dealerships, abstracting a little bit away from current day and looking a little down the road into the future. So strap in, ready to go here. We'll have a fun 30 minutes ahead. Okay, so let's jump right in and look at the actual overall menu that we're choosing from today. So I've broken this into six chunks over the next 30 minutes. So we'll talk about just generally setting the stage and the foundation for AI. We'll talk a little bit about Google because the Google ecosystem is changing literally in real time here. And no matter who you are across the automotive ecosystem, this is either already affecting you or will affect you very soon. And it's good to understand like how Google is trying to respond to the threat to their business overall. We'll talk about AI bots, and as all of us start ending up with bots that will be automated in our pockets, how much of that shopping process will be automated and will we delegate to these bots and what the implications will be. We'll talk about voice implications too with your phone and the implications there. Then we'll talk about the future of marketplaces, and we can really abstract this more to just advertising in general. But circling back to the Google conversation, what will the impact be to marketplaces like AutoTrader, Cars.com, Car Gurus, etc.? So whether you're getting your traffic today into your dealership from Google directly or through these marketplaces, I mean, there'll be implications for all of them. And then we'll talk about some practical steps. Where do we go from here overall? So let's jump right in with artificial intelligence and talk about sort of like a little bit of a foundational level setting. So I try not to be too bombastic and overly aggressive here, but in my lifetime, I've now can look back and say I've lived through a few transformational technologies. You look at the introduction of the PC and those early PCs. For those that are my age, they were very, very crude, very, very limited with what you could do. I think it was very hard at that point to look forward and say just how transformational having a PC on everyone's desk would be. I mean, look at all of us today. I'm looking into the screen of a laptop. You're all looking into the screen of a laptop or a desktop. Who would have known, 50 years ago that this would be so transformational? Then the internet came along in the 90s, and it was very easy at that point to discount what this would mean. The interfaces were clunky. We were literally plugging a phone line into the wall and using a modem that would be very fragile and would break anytime somebody else in the house would pick up the phone line. For those of you that would remember that. So hard to think about that in this environment today where Wi-Fi is ubiquitous. And, if the Wi-Fi goes down for 30 seconds on a plane from LA to New York, we get really annoyed. How things have changed and how the internet has become ubiquitous and has affected all of our lives. And then you think back to, the summer of 2007, where Steve Jobs got up on stage and announced this new technology where it was really a convergence of a phone, a camera, music, and a browser all on one device. And I remember discounting this because I was an avid and passionate BlackBerry user. And for those of you that in the audience that use a BlackBerry, I mean, I still miss that tactile keyboard. And I still get frustrated to this day with the inaccuracies or my inaccuracies trying to use the Apple keyboard to type out text or emails. It's very frustrating. But here we are. I mean, who would have known in 2007 watching Steve Jobs up on stage just how transformational that technology would be? So having said all that, I think it's very easy for us to look right now at this moment in time at AI and the current state of AI and probably brush it aside and discount it, right? It's a ChatGPT box, and many of us have downloaded ChatGPT and are using it either on our laptop or on our phone, but we're largely using it for queries, right? Queries that we would have otherwise used Google for 6 months, 9 months ago. Some of us are more progressive with structuring queries to actually make our day-to-day jobs more efficient. But I would just challenge everyone, and hopefully, if I convince you of anything today, it's over the next 25 minutes here that you've got to be paying attention to what the actual implications might be for AI overall. So let's dive right in. So if you look at the adoption rate for OpenAI, ChatGPT versus these other technologies, the time to reach 100 million users is unprecedented. It's been a huge tipping point here, which is great validation that what OpenAI is doing with ChatGPT, there's a market need for, and there's a curious customer. I mean, they do have a very interesting and smart business model with this freemium model where anybody can download it and try using it. But then there are sort of thresholds in terms of usage thresholds. They try to get you to upsell yourself into these more premium packages that unlock more features. But amazing to see. And if you look at the adoption rate of AI versus other technologies that we've seen in the past, the actual speed of the adoption to the previous slide point is much more dramatic than anything we've ever seen before. So good validation that there's a need, and good validation that consumers are open-minded to experimenting with these things. But let's move to the next slide and talk about Google overall. And will Google, where they're positioned, which is enviable, their dominance in the marketplace, will they be a disruptor, or are they about to be disrupted? And I think the answer is a bit of each. So let's look next at sort of where Google's dominance is. So if you look at their overall dominance in the sort of search area, Google has 90% plus of the browser technology, browser adoption overall. And we go to the next slide, you can see how they've translated that into this dramatically dominant advertising business that they've got. So $198 billion in revenue a year, and almost 60% of all the different businesses that Alphabet is involved with, including Waymo, right, which is in the news a lot right now. $198 billion, or 60%, almost 60% of Alphabet's total revenue is from the one-trick pony, which is effectively serving advertising alongside the searches. So obviously, if searches are under attack, which we're going to dig into next, then there's a problem. And Gardner believes that search volume next calendar year, will be down 25% for Google. So you might say, well, I'm not too really worried about that, but you should be, because all of us have become to rely on Google for traffic. Whether I'm an automaker, whether I'm a dealer, whether I'm a third-party website like Car Gurus, Cars.com, or AutoTrader, all of these entities across the whole supply chain rely on Google for good quality traffic. Remember, a lot of us pay vendors for SEO and are very thoughtful with content, whether we're putting videos on YouTube, whether we're doing blog posts or whatever. We're counting on Google indexing that data and then providing free traffic back to our websites. And if traffic is down overall, because consumers are migrating away from Google and starting to use more of these chatbots, OpenAI, ChatGPT, or whatever other chatbots are out there, it's a big challenge for Google to say, okay, we've got this big dominant position, 90% of browsers, 60% of my revenue is coming from advertising related to those searches. If consumers start migrating away from using Google to ask any question and answer every question, what does that mean overall for Google's business? So on the next slide here, you can see Google is searching actively for an answer to ChatGPT. We'll talk about some of the things that they're doing and how they can be disruptive. But then if you look at the next one, you can see that Apple is also looking at their traffic, and they're finding that it's challenging because they've got a challenge with search. For the first time in 22 years, Apple's search volume is down. So searches on phones on the Safari browser, the default browser on phones, is down because, just like Google's feeling, people are starting to use ChatGPT to answer questions that would have otherwise been answered either on their phone in Safari on Google, or going to the search bar for Google and typing in and getting the organic links. On the next slide, you can see that Adobe is feeling dramatic increases in the traffic that's going to websites across the web from chatbots. Now, this is from a very small base, right? So the average dealer, I'm going to presume for any of the dealers that are on today, less than 1% of the traffic to your websites is coming from chatbots right now, from these AI queries. But keep a close eye on that, because I suspect that's more than doubling every year. It may be doubling month over month, and over time you're going to start to see, oh wow, a significant and rapidly increasing percentage of the traffic that's coming to my website is coming from ChatGPT. So there are implications to that, right? There's no advertising yet alongside the search. We'll get to this in a few minutes, but how do you think about accommodating that consumer that might be typing something into ChatGPT? Where should I buy a car? Where should I service my vehicle in my local market? If they're putting that into ChatGPT, how are you going to intercept that consumer, either through organic search or some kind of paid search? And we'll get there today. So on the next slide, you can see that Apple now is considering, breaking the relationship that they have with Google. Google's effectively had, a dominant position, been the default search on Safari on our iPhones forever. And Apple may be saying, because of this trend, we need to hedge our bets, and we need to start integrating more AI into the search process. And it would be fascinating if Apple goes to more of a sort of OpenAI, ChatGPT-like interface instead of driving people to the Safari browser and Google as the default search. So the next two slides just quickly show the percentage of traffic that websites like Car Gurus, and on the next slide, Cars.com, get from organic traffic today off of Google. And in both cases, it's about a third of their traffic. So just like the average dealer, they've got to be looking at this and saying, okay, well, if Google's about to be disrupted, and that there's going to be less traffic coming to Google, as Gartner says that next year Google traffic could be down by 25%. That means that a lot of these sites that have relied on Google to be a nice, cheap, reliable source of traffic going forward might not have as much traffic coming in. So we're going to have to figure out, how do we all coexist in this new environment? And are there ways to work around this? And then on the next slide, just looking at what the Google interface looks like today, I presume that everybody on this call, if the earlier slides, 90% of all browser usage is Google, then we've all had this interface. But Google has been experimenting with different ways to sort of surface those organic results. And you can see here the AI overview pane, which is right at the top of the results, which, by the way, pushes down all the keywords, the AdWords, and then pushes down even further the organic results. They do show, interestingly, a couple of links off to the side, which are links from within that AI overview pane. But you can expect this will change very, very quickly, because what this is doing is it's pushing down the results that otherwise consumers would have clicked on to get through to your website, which means it's diluting the effect of both paid search, keep buying keywords, and also the organic efforts that you have to drive traffic to your websites. And it's very curious to me, experimenting with this, is what are the results, right? So I would encourage you to spend some time on Google. Type in, depending on which department you are at the dealership, right? If you're parts, if you're service, if you're sales, either new or used, type in some keywords, like play sort of like average consumer who's searching in their local market for a car, and see if your brand shows up in that AI overview pane, and if any of the links in there link to your dealership. Because if not, try to think through, how is AI indexing to certain brands and certain dealerships, and how do I make sure that I'm doing whatever they're doing, that these AI bots will index my content going forward, because this is going to become increasingly important for all of us from a traffic standpoint. So we will get to more of that in the next couple of sections. So let's dive in. Let's talk about AI agents overall. So when we look at the next slide, the consumer, it's easy to think through, if I start to trust on my phone ChatGPT, and it does a pretty good job of going out and crawling data across the internet and then bringing that back and synthesizing that into a short summary, then it's not too far of a stretch for us to think through, that at some point I'm just going to like have my bot start to negotiate for me. You know, it might, the version 1 might be simply, hey, whatever I'm going to call my chat bot. Hey, chat bot, you know, I need to get my car serviced. Would you go reach out to the dealer, find where there might be availability, and schedule a time slot, and find out, you know, if there's concierge service, like will they come pick up my car and deliver it back to my driveway? And the chatbot will go do that. And that might be through just web browsing, or they might actually be interacting with somebody on your side, right? So if you have AI that's answering phone calls and answering chats, it isn't too far out to believe that my bot's going to talk to the dealer's bot, and they're effectively going to get a meeting of the minds. And it's going to be very interesting to see. So I will trust my bot to do my negotiating, and you know, the dealer's bot is going to have to then negotiate back against bots. So we're going to have bot to bot interaction. So on the next slide, I have a cute little video for how this might play out. So we'll listen to that video.
Agent calling on behalf of Boris Starkov. He's looking for a hotel for his wedding. Is your hotel available for weddings?
Oh, hello there. I'm actually an AI assistant too. What a pleasant surprise. Before we continue, would you like to switch to Gibber Link mode for more efficient communication?
So I think my point is made. We can go on to the next slide. But, you know, I mean, if this plays out, then we're looking at a totally different way of interacting, right? The way that we as dealers have thought about interacting with consumers, it's been phone, email, texts, chat on my website. Well, now there's a new era we're entering where, you know, if the consumer starts to really trust their chatbot and that understands them intimately, and then can be tasked with going off and negotiating for them, where does that leave, you know, our BDC? Where does that leave, you know, our automated AI on our side? And are we even negotiating with a human, or are we negotiating with bots? Is the traffic to our website bots? You know, in the history of the internet, bots has been a dirty word. We don't want bots coming and scraping our data. But in the future, we actually want bots scraping our data, and we want to surface our data in such a way that it's very easy for, you know, Google's bots or anybody else's bots to consume our data, understand our data, and then get our data into the results on Google or anywhere else. So it's very interesting. This is all evolving real time. I don't have any answers yet, but I just want to make everyone aware that we're on the precipice of a dramatic change with how consumers shop and consumers' expectations. And as a result of that, all of us have to at least be thinking future, sort of like thinking forward in terms of like, how are we going to accommodate this new era? So if you look at sort of like data is going to continue to be king, whereas in the past we thought through SEO in terms of how to make sure Google was crawling my data. Now we need to be really thinking about how we can unlock our data and make it maximally crawlable and effective and descriptive of our cars and our services and our pricing. So it'll be very interesting to see going forward. So let's move on to the next section. And to compound that, you know, we can look at voice overall. So if you look at data on the next slide, you can see that, you know, more than half of us every day are interacting with voice. And this isn't surprising, right? You're driving or you're otherwise occupied and you're talking to your phone and you're asking Siri or Alexa to remind you of something, or take a note, or send yourself an email, or send someone an email, or respond to texts, right? So it's getting more sophisticated. It's still a little bit clunky in some cases, but it's getting dramatically better. And this data supports that, you know, more than half of people today are using it already. And I think that, you know, we need to think about the combination then. If consumers start to rely more on their AI bot on their mobile device and trust it because it understands them well, and then tasks it with going and negotiating, then the interaction is going to be through voice as well. So you might literally be corresponding with your chat bot in real time, back and forth, while it's going and doing research and doing negotiating on your behalf and reporting back to you on real time. So, you know, I'm no longer calling the dealer to negotiate, book appointments, check status, etc. I'm talking to my chatbot via my phone, And in the background, my chatbot is real time is interacting with dealers or OEMs or what have you, right? So again, thinking through, if you believe this is the way that the consumer is going, and this data supports that is the case, then what does that mean for the way that you in the future represent your brand, represent the connectivity back to consumers, whether it's a brand new consumer that's trying to engage with you, or from a loyalty standpoint, existing consumers overall. So we'll go to the next slide and sort of like, the summary here is really how do we ensure that we remain relevant with consumers in this world where things may go more towards bots and they may go more towards voice. What does SEO even mean anymore? If I'm interacting with my bot via my voice, then what is SEO? And then the question around, will agents actually do the negotiating? How much of the negotiating, et cetera? And how do I prepare for that future? Okay, 2 sections left. Let's go on to marketplaces. And in this case, for marketplaces, I'm describing really the car gurus, the cars.com, the auto traders of the world, and how their life is also going to change overall. So as you can imagine, on to the next slide, e-commerce for AI agents is also equally concerning and or exciting for the third-party marketplaces, because they're going to have to make sure their data is exposed and available for all of these AI bots if more of the consumers are going to be using them, as we're seeing evidence of already. So that means they will maybe have to change their business model pretty dramatically. If you look at any of them on the next slide, the model's really been built on prominence, meaning that, if you're a dealer and you want, more eyeballs, you want more traffic to your website and your vehicles overall, you can pay for a more expensive package and you will be guaranteed more exposure on these sites. That's typically by moving your vehicles up the page, having more impressions, more follow-up with consumers, et cetera. This has been great for consumer dynamics because you can sort of anticipate that a consumer is likely to click on things that are higher up the page. Google has proven that, dramatically more clicks on the first 10 links than someone ever going to the second page, et cetera. So we've been able to shape consumer traffic on third-party marketplaces very effectively, knowing consumer psychology and how consumers interact with inventory online when they're shopping. Well, this is all going to get tossed out, right? Because if I'm a bot, I'm not going to be, tempted by the sexy Ferrari on the first page and click on that. I've got a task to do, and I know exactly what my task is. So I'm going to go look at all the inventory. I'm going to look at all the dealerships. I'm going to look at all the pricing, and then I'm going to take all that data and I'm going to say, okay, so what's best? What criteria am I using? Am I looking at the cars that are closest, to my consumer? Am I looking at the ones that are the best price? Am I looking at the dealers that have the best reputation? Am I looking at the best descriptions? And this is going to dramatically change the way that the third-party marketplaces, the car gurus, the cars.com, the auto traders think about traffic as well. As we talked about earlier, if a third of their traffic today comes from Google organic, that could start to dry up. And more bots are going to directly be going onto their websites. And the way that they've shaped consumer activity by selling prominence to dealers will go away, and there'll be new ways to interact. So again, data will be king. All of this, all of what I've mentioned, the consumer, the bots, they're going to be craving getting access to really good, high quality, dependable data. The third-party marketplaces do a great job of aggregating that data, but they need to be thinking through their business model because it's going to change pretty dramatically. So on to the next slide, there's 2 protocols that are being established, which we need to be paying attention to. One is, as you can imagine, someone's going to establish a protocol between agents. If agents are going to negotiate, what's that communication language? Like in our cute little video earlier, how can we establish a common language, a common architecture, a common data schema to make sure that when my agent talks to your agent, we're not like talking English to Greek, right? We're talking English to English, and these things can communicate very effectively to make everyone's life a lot easier. And then on the next slide, there's from Anthropic, they're trying to establish a norm around model context protocol to make sure, whereas Google's trying to establish agent to agent protocol, Anthropic's trying to establish model context protocol to ensure that my agent can ingest, digest, and understand the data that's going to be on a third-party marketplace, it's going to be on a dealer website, or anywhere across the web. When these bots are crawling, we have to make this data presentable in a way that they can ingest it and understand it. And we're going to need more work around these kinds of protocols to establish these standards. So these aren't things for you to be concerned with necessarily, but I think that folks within your dealership, somebody within the dealership has to be staying abreast of these changes, because it's going to be very important for you to have very thoughtful conversations with any of your vendors, your website vendors, your marketing vendors, and anybody at the dealership who's trying to figure out how consumer activity is changing and how do we make sure that consumers continue to see our inventory and our availability and our pricing, and ultimately our scheduling times to either come in for a test drive or come in for service work, even if less and less of that traffic is coming from Google, and less of that traffic is actually humans coming in to my website, and more of it is being driven by bots over time. So you can think of, if you're a marketplace, this is, like I said earlier, equally exciting, but also concerning, because a lot is changing within their worlds in terms of the same things. What role will they play? What is SEO overall? How can they make sure their data is presented in such a way that the bots can understand it, ingest it, et cetera? And we may get closer to transactional marketplaces in the future because consumers won't get distracted, and the bots will come in ready to negotiate and ready to do a deal if a deal can be had. So let's get on to the last section here and say, where do we go from here? And thanks for sticking with me today. That was a lot for you to digest. So what we don't want to be is, we don't want to be the proverbial frog in the pot that doesn't understand the temperatures increasing and it ends up getting boiled, right? So these changes are going to happen in some cases slowly, in some cases very quickly, but I think, good for all of you for tuning in. And we all have to stay abreast of these changes, particularly if any of them take off very quickly. So it's interesting, for example, to watch what percentage of traffic to your website is coming in through bots. It'll be interesting to see how does Google continue to anticipate and neutralize the threat of AI overall, and do they continue to be this dominant, browser, or does, for example, Apple, as they're discussing on their Safari browser on the phone, do they start to move away from Google and build their own AI bots? And then what happens with voice at all? But let's talk about dealers for a second. So let's move on to the next slide. And by my calculations, about 60% of a dealer's total expense per month is payroll, right? Human capital, paying folks either in variable ops, fixed ops, or the back office. And I think that AI provides a unique opportunity here to drive efficiency. So let's look at a framework that I find very helpful on the next slide. And this hopefully is helpful for you as well, and can really frame up whether you're talking to a vendor who's pitching to you, whether you're thinking about the implications within your dealership. This framework hopefully will help. So phase one will be the co-pilot, right? If you look at Microsoft or Google today for their earnings calls, their CEOs are saying that somewhere between 30 to 40% of all the software code now is being written by AI bots, right? So now I can sit here, someone who's never coded in my life, I can interface with a ChatGPT box, and it can actually write me code real time to develop a software product. So very, very interesting. Kind of scary if I just did a 4-year undergrad and came out with a software developer degree, and now I'm looking for work, because we'll need fewer software developers, because those software developers that are already out there are going to become much more effective, right? Already 30 to 40% of their code can be automated. Pretty soon that'll be like 80, 90% of all their code. A software developer in the future is simply going to task the robots with doing code, right? So I think for any of the roles at a dealership, we're going to quickly see an agent that sits on any interface, on your phone, on your laptop, on your browser, and just anticipating what you're doing. It's like, hey, Steve, I see you're trying to do this. Do you want me to do it for you, right? And it's going to be like a series of like easy buttons where I'm going to be able to click the button and say, yeah, please complete that task. Please complete that task. And we're going to greatly increase the efficiency of every human who's doing anything repetitive within the dealership. So that's phase one. Phase two is when those easy, and anticipated co-pilots become good enough, they effectively become an agent. And, when I go home at night or home on the weekend, I can say, hey, look, I've got a bunch of stuff in my to-do box that I didn't get around to today. You do a pretty good job. Would you mind knocking all this stuff out and then reporting back? And tomorrow morning when I come in the office, or Monday morning when I come in the office, tell me what you were able to accomplish, what problems you had, and try to get as much of that done over the weekend. And it's going to be pretty cool, right? So we go from in the co-pilot phase of getting 20, 40% more effective with productivity. Now the agents can actually multiply you. So I'm like 5 times, 10 times more effective than I was before, because now I've got these little automated bots that run around and do stuff that I just don't have to do anymore, right? They can be working, in parallel with me, and they're a force multiplier. Well, then it gets interesting. And then there's really implications back to the previous page where 60% of a dealer's cost structure is human capital, because when the agents become good enough, then we can say, okay, well, maybe the next time someone, quits or retires, I don't need to replace them, right? Even without being more aggressive and laying off folks, think about those roles that are very repetitive today at the dealership, and think in the future, are we going to need a human in that seat, or will these bots be as good as the humans? And by the way, they're never going to call in sick. They're going to be able to work tirelessly and relentlessly 24/7. So in many ways, for repetitive tasks, and they're going to be 100% accurate every time. It's a little bit of garbage in, garbage out. But if we can train them right, then they're going to be super accurate every single time, never make a mistake, never call in sick. So I think it's an exciting time if you are the ones guiding the bots. It's maybe less if you're like going, oh, my job's going to be replaced. But I'm sure everyone on the call today is on this call here at this conference because they're interested in understanding, how do I adapt and ride this wave of change into the future? So let's wrap up. Last slide here. So as I look at the evolution of the dealership across all of these different departments, it's very interesting. 50 years ago, many of these departments didn't exist. And now we've got this very sophisticated, complex business that all of you are running with all these interdependent, departments. And I think it's been an exciting journey for me, serving dealers now for 25 years. But I think for everybody on this call, especially those that are a younger generation, it's interesting to look at the franchise dealer model and say, given everything that we've just said, and you may only believe half of what I've told you here today, but where will there be different departments? So one question to ask is there any low-hanging fruit across any of these departments to say we should look at really pushing AI adoption within a department to find efficiencies? Number two, and maybe more important, is things that I think about a lot is what new departments need to exist within a dealership. So where might we be 5, 10 years from now? What does this image look like? Because surely there will be new departments that pop up within the dealership. What will those be? And how can all of us be a part of creating that future and participating in that future? So with that, we'll go to our last slide. Here's my contact information. I'm happy to share this information with you and send you this presentation if you'd like. Thanks for being a great participant today. I'm thrilled that you were able to join this conference, and thanks to Dave for running this. And please follow up with me at this email here on the screen if you want to ever discuss this stuff or you'd like a copy of this presentation. And I really appreciate you being here today.